Okay, welcome everybody. Good morning to the fourth day of our multi-agency child exploitation programme of learning, and I believe this is session 8 of 10. We've had such an amazing week so far. Hopefully some of you have joined us for some of our earlier sessions. I'm really pleased that we've got Barnardo's Independent Child Trafficking Guardianship Service, and we're joined by Katie and Jonathan to deliver today's session. So they're going to be delivering for approximately 90 minutes, but hopefully we can get lots of kind of engagement and participation from you via the chat, or we're quite a small group today, so please feel free to unmute your microphones and join in the conversation really. So as I've said, we're doing a MACE programme of learning this week, and this was all around Child Exploitation Awareness Day, which was on Monday, the 18th of March. As a partnership, we were particularly greedy and we decided to kind of use the whole week to raise awareness of child exploitation, and that's why we've got all the partners in to deliver the sessions. But there's still lots of ways you can get involved. Primarily through our social media channel. So if you follow us on at NYSCP1 on X, Instagram and Facebook, you'll see we've been posting stuff all through the week, which you can just like and share, and then that goes out across your social media channels. Keep promoting what we've been doing with your teams and colleagues. We've still got a couple more sessions. We've got a session later on and we've got a session on Friday, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Get involved because they've been such amazing sessions so far. And again, if you want to kind of promote the Be Aware Knowledge Hub, which is our kind of information hub around child exploitation, let's get that out there in terms of sharing that resource, not just with professionals, but with wider communities and young people and parents and carers as well. So just in relation to the social media content, I've just popped a few bits up on there. Keep an eye out for it. It's quite a bold design, but again, we've been promoting it quite heavily. Please like and share wherever you can. And these are the remainders of our learning sessions this week. So as I've said, we've got Barnardo's delivering this morning. At 4 o'clock today, we've got Your Sexual Health, who are going to be doing a session around sexual health support and sexual exploitation. And then on Friday lunchtime, we've got our last session delivered by the Children's Society, all around financial exploitation, which is a really kind of new and emerging form of exploitation that it's really important that we start to raise that awareness of. Just to kind of keep in mind, if you have missed our earlier sessions, again, we've had some brilliant ones. The ones that I've been able to record, some of them we haven't been able to record because obviously they've discussed things of a slightly sensitive nature, but the ones I've been able to record will go on our YouTube channel. So again, give us a follow on at NYSCP and you'll see those come up probably around tomorrow lunchtime. All the slides and resources I will put on the Be Aware Hub for all the sessions, so you will be able to see those as well. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and then I'll hand over to Jonathan and Katie. Thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. That's great. Before I start sharing, we'll just introduce ourselves because once I start sharing, you'll probably still be able to see me, but I won't be able to see anybody, and it feels a bit less interactive from my point of view. So I'm Katie Ryan. I'm one of the Children's Service Managers at the National Counter Trafficking Centre. I oversee our national operations team, which kind of does a lot of the training and awareness, etc. I'm fairly new to the service, but I have delivered this training a good few times now, so hopefully I know what I'm talking about, and I've got a background in youth justice and vulnerable young people. And Jonathan will introduce himself and has delivered this training many times, so you're in safe hands.
Morning all, thanks Katie, no pressure. So I'm Jonathan Savage. I'm a team manager within Barnardo's National Counter Trafficking Centre. I've been here about just over 5 years. I mainly work in the East Midlands, but I live in Sheffield, so I'm familiar with South Yorkshire at least, and I've been to North Yorkshire lots of times. Before that, I worked in sort of early education, did a stint in the Home Office, did a stint in the prison service, so I've got quite a broad awareness of this kind of area. And for my sins, I worked on the NRM project back in 2009, so you can blame me for the NRM later on.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's always difficult delivering sessions like this because we never quite know where people's knowledge and experience is at. You know, it's quite a kind of a broad introductory session. There is quite a lot to get through in the hour and a half. So some of it might be brand new information to you and you might think, oh, I really want to know more. we'll kind of direct you to where we've got some more training at the end, but some of it might be bread and butter to you and you might already know, so just kind of bear with us, I guess. And it's in kind of sections. We're not going to have a break because it's just 90 minutes. We're going to whittle through, but we're going to kind of stop at the end of each section and just double check the chat and see if you've got any questions. So please feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll come back to you. When I'm sharing, I might not necessarily see hands up and things like that, so but we will kind of make sure that we stop and come back to things. Okay, just bear.
Katie, you're on mute.
Sorry, I've muted myself. If somebody can say when they can see that, is that? Can you see
we can see your notes. So if you just start your slideshow, it'll go.
Just a bit delayed there.
That's it. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so welcome. We've done that a bit. Okay, I'm just going to move on quickly to talk about, why we're here. Why are we talking to you about trafficking today from Barnardo's and from the National Counter-Trafficking Centre? You may or may not know, Barnardo's is commissioned to deliver the Independent Child Trafficking Guardianship Service. Very snappy. That service is actually outlined in the Modern Slavery Act 2015. Initial kind of pilots were in 2017, and essentially it's kind of rolled out slowly but surely since then. The idea is that it's a national service. That's what's stated in the legislation. It just hasn't quite got round to, the Home Office haven't quite got round to the national rollout yet. They've been doing it in sections. So currently those areas on that slide are the areas that we cover, of which North Yorkshire is one. The reason for the random Barnardo's branding there is you may have seen Barnardo's new advert. Barnardo's is changing its branding. That's very, very new, like last week. So these slides are not in our new Barnardo's brand, but we thought we ought to kind of put the new logo on there because actually you'll probably start to become familiar with that and certainly will use that going forward. Okay. So what is the ICTG service? What is the Independent Child Trafficking Guardianship Service? There's kind of three elements of our service, really. The first element that you might come across as a professional is our guardianship assessment team, which is essentially a bit like our front door, a bit like our MASH or whatever different organisations call it. That's where we receive all our referrals. Professionals can ask us questions, and it's very much a kind of initial response, a triage, a fact-finding, sometimes some initial signposting, some initial safeguarding, but it's that kind of that front door, really. The service then moves into actual support for a young person from our independent child trafficking guardians. We'll talk about it a bit more on the next slide, but that support can either take the form of being direct support with a young person, or it can be what we call indirect support, which is more like an ICTG being involved in a group of professionals. So they're providing that specialist kind of trafficking lens, awareness, guidance, information, knowledge about the trafficking element of the support that child needs. So they might not actually do that direct support with the direct work with the child, but they're very much providing that lens. And I'll come on to talk about the differences in a minute. And then the other thing that we do as a service, which is what we're doing today, which is our national training and awareness raising. So we deliver specialist sessions like this for individual local authorities or individual organisations, but we also have a programme that we run regularly all the time, which is kind of bite-sized chunks of training. So we do one on the Modern Slavery Act in a lot more detail than we'll cover today. We do one on the National Referral Mechanism, and they're kind of hour-long. So they're quite accessible, but they are, they cover just a small part of our work and of what you might need to know about in terms of supporting young people who have been victims of trafficking or you think might be victims of trafficking. Okay. So what does our ICTG service look like? So it falls into kind of two strands, really, I suppose. So our direct support is what you'd think of as supporting, working alongside a young person. That is for young people where there is no there is no adult with parental responsibility in the UK. So that's mainly for unaccompanied children and young people. Occasionally, we can do direct support for a young person where there is an adult with parental responsibility, but that would be where, you know, perhaps there's no other professionals involved and the referral comes into us, or there's not that support mechanism involved. So usually the direct support that we would do with young people, that might be in person, that might be face to face, that might be kind of virtually, depending on what that young person's needs are. That is for young people who have not got that adult with parental responsibility around them in the UK. So our work in that, in working with those children, is really around, you know, supporting that child and working with professionals supporting that child to make sure that they're protected from further harm, and obviously preventing possible re-victimisation, re-trafficking, preventing kind of going missing episodes, and really importantly promoting the child's recovery. So our work with that child and that group of professionals might be around completing the NRM referral and supporting that child through that. But it might be around, that might have happened, and it might be around supporting that child to recover and obviously kind of, you know, manage their experiences really. Obviously, that involves working with carers, with foster carers, with if children are in residential care. Sometimes children, young people are in supported accommodation. Sometimes they're kind of in independent supported accommodation. So it's supporting that child kind of to recover and kind of settle and manage whatever's going on for them, really. The timescales for that can be different depending on the needs of the child. So if a child's got quite a lot of support professionals around them, perhaps they're in foster care, perhaps they've got some education, we might not actually work with them for as long as a child who's a bit more isolated. And it depends again what the work is that we're supporting them with. So indirect support really is about our service, our ICTGs, providing that release kind of specialist trafficking advice, guidance, knowledge to an existing group of professionals around the child. So it might be that a referral is coming to us from social care perhaps, and we've attended a strategy meeting, and then we'll continue to attend multi-agency meetings or liaise with that social worker, provide case consultations. We might then do a specific case consultation with a youth offending, a youth justice worker, for example, around kind of defence, around criminal prosecution from the Modern Slavery Act. So there might be some specialist pieces of work that we're doing alongside the professionals to support them, to make sure that that child has got the kind of that specialist kind of lens around trafficking. And that would be with children where there is an adult with parental responsibility in the UK. That's the kind of scope of the ICTG service as is kind of set out in the Home Office guidance. So again, that's obviously around keeping children safe. It's around supporting safety planning, obviously supporting safeguarding, advice and guidance around missing episodes, and also kind of helping professionals and the young person and family navigate that, you know, the quite complex criminal justice system, or you know, other processes that they're going through, but making sure that there's that trafficking lens, and also supporting transitions. So supporting where young people are moving perhaps from a family home or unsafe accommodation into supported accommodation, or into being cared for, or transitions around when young people are turning 18. So again, supporting, making sure that there's the correct, I suppose, information and advice there. Okay, I'm going to move on because this is about our service, which is fine, but I'm sure there's other things that you want to know the detail of some of the subject area. So just a little bit of feedback about our service. So you can see there some young people directly, some feedback directly from young people. You know, I don't know how to thank you for what you do. Thank you for taking care of me. But you can also see some feedback from professionals in there about, you know, the impact that our service has been able to make to help them to support young people as best that they can with their experiences. You know, depending on your role, your experiences, your kind of you know, the way in which you work with young people, your caseloads, as it were, can depend on how often you might come across a young person who is a victim of trafficking or who you think might be. For some people, that might be one young person, you know, amongst a caseload of a lot of other young people. So it can be really helpful to have the ICTG service to kind of, you know, where that's perhaps more their bread and butter. You know, it's a professional to kind of be part of that support who's really got that kind of specialist knowledge. So we'll have this again at the end of the slide, but just so that you know how to refer to us if you've not done that before. There's a referral form, which if you just Google it comes up. It's the ICTG Service referral form. We do have a 24/7 support line. So that is mainly designed for if young people are newly found, or if they're you know, so perhaps the police or perhaps kind of border staff, for example, or social care are aware of a young person and want some of that immediate safeguarding advice and immediate kind of support. So that is there. That's for referral or for advice and guidance. And then our website, nctc.org.uk, has got lots of information, advice and guidance. And then there's a button through the website that you can refer as well. Okay, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand over to Jonathan for a bit of an overview of what is trafficking. We've been talking about that's what our service does, but what is that and how does that work?
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Katie. So a bit of a high-level definition then, and some of the background to what trafficking is. So like most of the countries in Europe, we're signed up to various conventions around trafficking, and most UK legislation is based on those. The kind of starting point, there's a Palermo Protocol at the bottom of the screen, which gives the sort of wider definition. So trafficking, it's about recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring or receipt of people for the purpose of exploitation, and that can include an element of force, coercion, manipulation, deception. And for children, we don't need to talk so much about how the trafficking concerns. It's more about the trafficking has happened and it's for the purpose of exploitation. The UNHCR guidelines, that gives the kind of specific definition. So it's where the high level definition where somebody is moved, including within the UK, and that doesn't necessarily need to be long distances. We've had cases where it can be moving from one house to another in the same street. If it's for the purpose of exploitation, the distance is almost immaterial. There was even one case where a child being sexually exploited moved from a mobile phone to webcam, and because there was movement for the purpose of exploitation, that fits that definition of trafficking. There's an element of control, so whether that be through direct threat, manipulation, grooming, deception, and it's for the purpose of exploitation, as it says in the Palermo Protocol. And all of the legislation in the UK mirrors the language used in these protocols. So that's a sort of the high level definition of trafficking. Okay, to move on to the next one, please. Yeah, so I'm going to get this is a little bit of a sort of knowledge test, get a sense of what you already know about trafficking. And you can either shout out or pop it in the chat. Just have a think about what sorts of different things might constitute modern day slavery and exploitation. What sort of categories of exploitation might fit within that, and as a result could also fit within trafficking. So in your experience, what sorts of things are covered within modern slavery and trafficking? Like I say, feel free to shout out, because I know there's a real range of expertise in this group. So I know you're going to be familiar with some of this. Or pop it in the chat. Oh, here we go. Somebody's typing. Yeah, county lines, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of the wider definition of criminal exploitation. Forced labour, yeah, totally, absolutely. County lines again, yeah. Yeah, they're two of the big categories there. I dropped a hint to one of them in just now, I think, when I talked about the different categories. Okay, and the person who put forced labour in there, sorry to put you on the spot. Do you want to give me a couple of examples of the sorts of things that you've come across within forced labour? What sorts of things that constituted? Okay, no problem. Should we move on to the next one? And I'll give you. Oh, here we go. You're popping up now. Sorry, Tracy. It takes a little while to come through sometimes, doesn't it?
Sorry, I'm not working directly with young people myself, so I'm delivering the training rather than kind of coming across children myself.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. Okay, no problem at all. So yeah, there's some examples there of criminal exploitation. We tend to talk about the county lines model because it's a business model. It's a highly sophisticated, manipulative, and callous business model. So we try and use that terminology to cover the different aspects of it because it's about the transfer of drugs and the supply of drugs, but it's also about money laundering. It's also about exploitation of vulnerable adults. So there's lots of different aspects to that. Drugs offences, so that can include things, well, anything around drugs really. It can include local transportation, local supply, other stuff through the kind of the more longer distances. Acquisitive crime, we see quite a lot of that. Pickpocketing's one example, but we see things like burglaries, car theft to order, robberies from shops, anything you can think of that's going to bring a profit to the person exploiting the child. There's ATM theft and shoplifting, as it says. Benefit fraud, so quite complex, that one, where we see sometimes children being used to perhaps claim child benefits in more than one location under different names by an exploitative adult. Sometimes we see parents being kind of exploited to exploit their child to demonstrate signs of disabilities or learning needs to access disability living allowance. That's something that happens. Money laundering saw a lot of that during COVID, actually, where a lot of young people who were directly exploited before exploiters didn't have as much access, so they used them to launder money through things like Monzo or even PayPal. Cannabis growth, that's interesting because that crosses over with labour exploitation as well, because essentially it's like agricultural exploitation, but also for the cultivation of illegal drugs. And violent crimes, sometimes we see young people being exploited to intimidate people or to commit violent crimes on behalf of their exploiters. It's a sort of trajectory of exploitation sometimes. In terms of indicators, there's going to be a lot of crossover of these indicators through the different categories, but missing episodes, running away, are very common. Links to places with no known reason for going there. So this is I guess the stereotypical county lines example where a child might be found in a railway station 100 miles from home with no real obvious reason for being there. Unexplained money, clothes, mobile phones, as a result of money given to them by exploiters, but also as in terms of gifts. So often particularly within county lines type criminal exploitation, children would be given high value gifts as part of the grooming them into the gang environment and grooming them into the lifestyle. Affording items with unknown means, particularly we see things like drugs in that one, where a child has develops a drug habit through contact with their exploiters, but has no financial means of sustaining that. They're being supplied for nothing, and that in turn is causing a debt for that child. So it tightens the control, tightens the connection with the criminal exploiters there. Text messages or calls of concern, and this is often around the urgency of it. So it's where a child maybe gets a message and they become visibly agitated. They need to deal with it instantly. They get a message, they need to leave the house in 2 minutes. It's about that element of control. We all know that children often get a lot of messages and are very active on social media, but it's about the response here. It's about, I've got to deal with this right now, and that sense of urgency. Actual or suspicion of physical assault or unexplained injuries, that can be either as a result of altercations with criminals involved in the exploitation, or sometimes it can be repercussions, or sometimes it can be warning injuries. We see quite often if a child is trying to exit the exploitation or they're perceived to have done something wrong, they'll get an injury that's visible but non-life threatening, so like a scratch to the arm or a mark on the face, that kind of thing. Carrying weapons, children often feel unsafe in the environment where they're being criminally exploited and may carry weapons. There may be an encouragement for them to do that by their exploiters. Decline in school performance and attendance. And I would add to that inconsistencies in school performance or attendance. So sometimes we'll see a child who was otherwise doing very well suddenly decline, or we might see a child suddenly their attendance goes up because the exploiters know that they're on the radar. They know they're being observed, so they'll encourage the child to be really visible in school to throw professionals off track. And sometimes we'll see behavioural things where a child is exploited to deliberately misbehave, so they get moved to perhaps a pupil referral unit or specialist provision, and part of that is around them having access to other vulnerable young people, and the exploiters using them to do that. So it's sophisticated and cynical stuff here. A child perhaps seeing themselves as part of a gang, particularly if that's a sudden development, and things like changes in emotional well-being and sadly sometimes self-harm. And there's crossover between these, but these are all very much within criminal exploitation as well as some of the others. Can you move on, please, Katie? Sexual exploitation. So this can be the older boyfriend or girlfriend model where an older person cultivates a relationship with a younger person, which the younger person believes is genuine, but actually is a route into exploitation. Seen quite a lot of use of rental properties for sexual exploitation. The area I cover, it's often it can be like Airbnbs in the Peak District. I guess in your case, it might be similar places in North Yorkshire Moors or on the coast, short-term holiday lets that are being used as a location to exploit children. Parties in the nighttime economy, that's often a gateway in where a child is invited to a party and they feel that they're, oh, I'm an adult, I've been invited to this grown-up party, how exciting. And that's an environment for the exploiters to target them and groom them and make that contact. Child abuse imagery, that can come within sexual exploitation. And sexual exploitation can often occur alongside criminal exploitation as well. So we're aware that some gangs will require sexual exploitation of children as part of that initiation, or as a punishment, or as a means of control. In terms of indicators, there can be physical signs of abuse, physical injuries, or sexual injuries. There's also a lot around the self-harm or lowering of emotional well-being. So around young people sadly being made to feel like less than they are by their exploiters to create that dependency, feeling as though they're not worth anything, and the exploiter provides that only source of affection and concern and support, kind of creating that dependency and that devotion there. Unexplained visitors, phone or social media activities, so similar to as with criminal exploitation, and similarly with gifts, items and money. Often with sexual exploitation, it can be clothing or cosmetics, things that are connected with the physical appearance of the child. Unexplained STIs or pregnancy. And I've alluded to this before, really, where older or controlling people, where the child believes they're in an intimate relationship with them. We're not necessarily looking at huge age gaps here. And we're also seeing this increasingly being part of, as I said before, alongside criminal exploitation. So there's been quite a few cases where perhaps an older drug dependent female, for example, forms a relationship with a teenage male who thinks this is a genuine relationship, and it plays on all the adolescent vulnerabilities around the excitement of a relationship and all that sort of thing, as another means of control, as a way of maintaining control over that young person. So it's almost two layers of exploitation. The adult themselves is being exploited by the criminal gang, and the child is being exploited. Often missing episodes, running away, and again links to places with no known reason for going there. Yeah, okay, we'll move on to the next one, please. Forced compulsory labour. Just some examples. It can be any working environment, really. The ones that we see more often than others, agriculture, restaurants and fast food, construction, nail bars, car washes, and we find often this occurs en route to the UK for unaccompanied children. They'll often have been exploited through their labour somewhere else. They may have come to the UK seeking asylum, and that exploitation may be resumed by connected exploiters in the UK, or it's had a really harmful impact on them on the way to the UK, and they're traumatised by that experience. Some cultural things around this, actually. For example, so we often see Vietnamese young people being exploited in nail bars or being exploited into cannabis cultivation, where Car washes is an interesting one. There was a police force in my neck of the woods that did some research a couple of years ago, and they worked out that if you're paying less than £5 to have your car washed, the numbers just didn't add up, and it was likely to be as a result of exploitation. So really prevalent at one point. And in terms of indicators, it's things like paint or building materials on clothes, chapped hands, physical injuries incurred through their employment, maybe having work-specific uniform or clothes, missing episodes with a structure quite often. So they're going missing 6 o'clock to midnight, or they're going missing 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. It's around a working structure. Maybe having an ID specific to work. As I said before, the disclosures of forced labour abroad, that can often lead to more forced labour in the UK. And again, the unexplained money, the unexplained clothes, possessions, mobile phones, that kind of thing. And leaving home without any explanation can be another one. Okay, move on to the next one, please. Domestic servitude. So I always ask on this one, can anybody think of an example of domestic servitude? There was one really high profile about a year or so ago that was all over the news. It was a documentary. Does anybody remember that? Quite a prominent public figure. I suspect there are probably little light bulbs that I can't see. There we go, Mo Farah. Yeah, perfect, exactly. Yeah, very much a stereotypical example of what labour exploitation can look like. Being brought into the country by someone he thought was an extended family member, effectively confined to being at home, domestic tasks, the sorts of examples it says under types there. So it's the domestic servant / housemaid, care provider, nanny, and sometimes, as it says, sometimes share between households within a community. And really hidden, this one, really hard to pick up, and it's often something that might be picked up in other interactions with the family. So perhaps if a social worker is visiting for something else, there might be a child who's treated differently to the other children in the home, or has different food, eats alone, sleeps in different conditions, that kind of thing. Sorry, my laptop's bleeping at me. And I suppose in terms of things like not being registered with a GP or school, perhaps excessive tiredness, perhaps given a time scale for completing tasks. So it's not like household chores, or you do the washing up twice a week. It's like you do this list and you must do it within a day or something. It's the kind of structure of work and isolation from peers, whether that be other children in the household or whether that be peers outside the household. So, and as I say, domestic servitude, very hidden, probably a lot more common than we think it is. Okay, and I think there's one more. Just on the next one, please, Katie. Ooh.
Sorry, Jonathan, I'm just having some issues with my sharing, and
so no worries.
Hopefully that was you were all oblivious because you were carrying on talking. I'm just going to reshare and hope that works.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Thank you. It's the wonders of Teams, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more other programs that I've got open that I probably should have closed.
Jumping in and interrupting. Yeah.
Causing some havoc.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, can you see that now?
I can see domestic servitude. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'll just move on to the next one if it'll let you. Brilliant. Perfect. And the last sort of major category is organ harvesting, which is pretty gruesome, to be honest. It's thankfully not very common. We've not seen many examples of children who've experienced this within our service, maybe just one or two of the many thousands we've worked with. But it's where exploiters remove the organs of that child for commercial profit through illegal sale or use. And the indicators are things like unexplained injuries or scars, longer term missing periods consistent with surgery and recovery, memory loss often from trauma or from being drugged, anaesthetized, sedated, arrival to the UK with unknown medicines, so things like antibiotics that don't have a prescription, or sometimes traditional medicines, and a real fear of health professionals, understandably so. And the scenario typically with organ harvesting, the ones we've come across, it could be, for example, where a child has initially paid to be smuggled, to be taken out of a dangerous location, and then they get to a certain point where the smugglers will say, the money's run out now, we're not going to do anything else for you unless you support us in another way. And that's where organ harvesting can occur. Sometimes a cornea or a kidney is taken, and that pays for the child's onward journey. Very hidden. We know of a few cases in our service. It could be more widespread than we think it is, and there's no reason to assume it's confined to outside the UK. It probably happens within the UK. It's just not very well known. So yeah, I won't dwell on that too much. It's quite gruesome, but just to be aware that it is a thing. Okay. Any questions about any of the exploitation types I've gone through? Any surprises? Are they broadly things that you'd heard of before? Just pop something in the chat, or pop something, or give me a shout if there's anything that particularly resonates with young people you've worked with or you've come across before. I'm going to guess quite a lot of people have probably come across county lines type exploitation, probably labour exploitation. Oh yeah, so somebody's typing. This is the slight challenge with Teams presentations, isn't it? It sometimes feels a little stunted, but I'm on tenterhooks now to see what's being typed. There we go. County lines and sex exploitation. Yeah, absolutely. They're the ones that we would expect people to be more familiar with. Organ harvesting is a surprise. Yeah, it's thankfully, as I say, we don't come across it that often, whether that's underrepresentation or not. Yeah, online exploitation, sextortion. Yeah, quite a few come across there, definitely. Yeah. With organ harvesting, sometimes we hear about it through another person who says, there was somebody else who was with me until this point, and then they went afterwards. I think that's what happened. Yeah, okay. And any questions, or am I making sense? If I'm not, just shout up and ask, please. Okay. All right, well, we'll move on to the next part then, where I'm going to talk a bit more about ways children are controlled, how that works. I've talked a little bit about some of that already. Yeah, I mean, anything or anything and everything an unscrupulous adult can think of to gain control effectively. So we're looking stuff like grooming in the kind of sexual exploitation sense, where you kind of someone's cultivating that false dependency, that false relationship. Lots of manipulation, lots of trying to present a skewed view to young people. So quite often with criminal exploitation, we'll see the exploiters trying to offer that sense of belonging. So they might be emphasizing issues in a child's home life. They might be getting across ideas, your parents don't understand. I think you had a presentation from the Iverson Trust, so they would have talked about this a lot more depth and expertise than I am, but very much breaking down existing relationships can be part of that. Violence and threats, including sexual and emotional abuse, absolutely, yeah. Or the threat of, as I say, the threat of those things, or the threat of those towards a person that the victim cares about, like a sibling or a parent or someone like that. Fear for the safety of family and friends, the same kind of setup there. Isolation, yeah, consciously isolating a child, consciously instilling this idea that nobody else understands you. Oh, don't go to school. Nobody's going to help you at school, but come and do this with me. We'll do all these things, and really cutting off other sources of advice and support and relationships. Confiscation of identity documents, absolutely. When a child is from overseas, having control of the passport, having control of the ID card, so the child has no means of travelling independently. They're totally dependent on their exploiter for any movement that goes on. Promises of a better future, whether that be financial and material gains, and that can be quite literal. That can be you'll work for us for 6 months and then you'll get a sum of money and we'll set you up to do things on your own. That can very often happen in the sort of nail bar kind of context, or the cannabis grow context, or it can be selling a lifestyle. It can be things like social media videos of drugs gangs, loads of money, expensive cars, nice clothes, and just trying to sell that idea that this is where you're headed. This is what it's going to be like. You're not going to get these opportunities in the normal way, and just sort of selling those sorts of images. Forced drug and alcohol misuse, particularly common in sexual exploitation, but can be in others as well. and beliefs in witchcraft or harmful traditional practices, or indeed skewed versions of lots of religious beliefs actually in different cultures, where they're used as a means of control. It's are you we've seen situations where a child quite literally thinks that somebody can control them through witchcraft, or we've seen cases where religious beliefs have been twisted and skewed around obedience or respect for your elders, or doing as you're told, or being a good girl or a good boy, that kind of thing. So it's lots of stuff around there, and the witchcraft and traditional practices can sometimes link in with things like female genital mutilation, that kind of thing as well. So there's a lot of correlation between those things sometimes. So just a few examples there. Yeah, I mean, it's, as I say, it's limited only by the imagination of the exploiters, sadly. Just move on to the next one, please. Yeah, and this is increasingly common, the idea that children are appearing to consent as well, or that they're outright denying and saying absolutely I'm in no way exploited because of the way it's been presented, the way it's happened over time. Some of the ways that can look as though it's not exploitation is if the child is receiving some sort of payment or reward, even if they are receiving appropriate compensation for what they're doing. Even if it appears to be a legally recognised wage, that doesn't mean it's not exploitation. Was somebody trying to ask a question? Sorry, I thought I heard a little noise. No? Okay. Increased freedom, independence and responsibility. Yeah, absolutely. The sense of progression sometimes within exploitation, particularly within criminal exploitation, where a child is given the impression they're rising through the ranks, they're being given more responsibility, they're being promoted. This is a career path, giving that kind of sense, and then shutting down all the alternatives is saying, oh, well, you're never going to do any well at school, but hey, you can come and do this, and in 5 years you'll have your own BMW. In 5 years you'll be this, you'll be that, and trying to sort of sell that. Sometimes with young people, that literally what they're experiencing exploitation-wise in this country is better than what they've come from. The exploiters treat them better than they would have been treated in their home country, or there's nothing else there. They've got no family. We see a lot of orphan children being exploited, around not wanting to be seen as failing the family. So sometimes this is where people smuggling, economic migration, trafficking, they blur, and a child is perhaps initially thinking they're coming to the UK to earn money to send home to their family, and then that twists, that distorts, the money gets lower and lower and lower. The child gets told, oh, well, you can earn money, but first you've got to pay off the cost of your journey to the UK and your accommodation and all the training we're doing for you. So that kind of distortion of something that the child initially starts off thinking, I'm doing a really good thing here, I'm making things better for my family, and the exploiter's using that to advantage. Fear of prosecution and repercussions if they committed a crime. So we see a lot of stuff around joint enterprise where multiple children are involved in the same crime, and a fear of disclosing because they'll be associated with something. Well, they just happen to be there. So you might see one person commits a very serious crime, 4 or 5 others are with them. The others didn't have anything specifically to do with that other than being present, but their worry is, oh, I'll go down for that serious assault, I'll go down for that murder. My whole life is ruined because of what somebody else did. And repercussions as well. So if I tell somebody about this crime I've been involved in, other people involved will know about it, and they'll get revenge on me, or the other people operating in a similar kind of environment will get revenge. There's rivalry with other people involved, and care and love for the person exploiting them, whether that be genuine or whether that be as a result of grooming. We do sometimes see familial exploitation or sibling exploitation, and that's unbelievably hard for the exploited victim, particularly if they've never known anything else. So real layers and layers of stuff here. Any questions about any of that, or any comments or observations? Any surprises? Okay, we'll move on. I mean, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. So if anything suddenly pops into your head, I'll hold on to that thought. So in terms of professionals' responses then, yeah, child trafficking is absolutely a child protection issue and a safeguarding issue. And like all of those things, information sharing is absolutely key. It's very unlikely a child is going to come up to a professional and say, I am being exploited, I am being groomed, I am being trafficked. It's so unlikely it's going to happen, but there will be things that you can see that will make you ask those questions, the sorts of indicators we talked about earlier. So just being professionally curious, asking those gentle questions, looking at the situation. Hang on, this child that I'm seeing today is wearing an absolutely brand new pair of trainers. They come from a really impoverished background. There's no way they could have those. Where have they come from? Or conversely, yesterday this child was wearing the latest designer gear. Today they're looking really disheveled and tired. Just noticing those things and thinking, well, hang on, is there something else going on there that I need to think about? Not assuming, yeah, I mean that's a hopefully a fairly standard part of all of our practice, not to make those assumptions, and to talk to the child and listen to their account. And like I said, with the professional curiosity, listening to what they're not saying as well. I mean, I know that's a very glib and easy thing to say, but if there are big pauses in the conversation, if they start off on going up down a particular route and then stop talking, or if they talk about how they're experiencing things but don't mention any people or locations, they're things that definitely should make us think, well, why am I only getting part of the story here? Why am I not getting the whole picture? And believing them, showing care, support and reassurance, and within that, believing what they're saying, showing a genuine interest in what they're saying. Meeting immediate needs. So we're talking stuff like the what's it called, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. If a child hasn't got somewhere to sleep, food, clothing, faith, all those sorts of things, how can they engage with more complex things? So making sure they're comfortable and safe and giving them the time to feel that before expecting them to disclose. Building the picture of exploitation and bearing in mind we can be looking at multiple exploitation as well as multiple indicators. So the child is a commodity to the exploiters. So one day they might be delivering drugs to a house. The next day they might be opening a fake bank account. It's about what's happening, what the situation is, what the indicators are showing. Language and cultural differences, yeah, that can be difficult, but if you persist and if you try and raise your awareness and learn about those, it doesn't have to be a barrier. And we've got quite a lot of experience and resources around working with particular cultural groups. So, for example, we've got lots of knowledge around working with Vietnamese young people, children from Roma cultural backgrounds. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone if there's a situation you're unfamiliar with, and we may be able to help or point you in the right direction. Absolutely follow your local processes all the time. Always inform your manager. Always inform your child protection lead. Always refer to the police. Refer to local authority safeguarding processes, and Section 47. Yeah, consider strategy meetings every single time. I mean, we would argue probably you always need to have a strategy meeting where trafficking is a concern, if only to go through that process, get all the right agencies in the room, and work out what to do next. It might be that you don't pursue that all the way through. It doesn't necessarily mean the child ends up being taken into care, but it's important to go through that process and make sure all the right agencies have had the opportunity to input to that conversation. Yeah, so that's the professional response there, and we'll move on to the next one. So before I start the Modern Slavery Act, any questions at all, just put your hand up, stick it in the chat, shout out. Anything I've just said not make sense or unclear? No, looks like we're okay. Okay. I think poor Katie's having IT issues again. It's a nightmare, this sort of thing sometimes. Here we go. Yeah, so oops. So the Modern Slavery Act, like I said earlier, it combines a lot of the existing legislation into a single piece of legislation. So the crimes of trafficking, all of the elements of it were captured under different bits of law, but they were all brought under one piece of legislation in 2015. And it also brought the NRM into being a mandatory process. And I'll talk about the NRM a bit later. It increased support and protection for victims. It increased sentences for perpetrators. So in certain circumstances, trafficking can carry a life sentence. It is a serious crime. It's up there with serious violent offences, serious sexual offences, and it created the role of the anti-slavery commissioner as well, who's an independent but government appointed commissioner, as it says, who scrutinises modern slavery and the responses to it across the country, meets with all of the stakeholders involved, commissions research, generally tries to keep a focus on modern slavery, because it's when the Modern Slavery Act came in, it was an incredibly hidden crime, and it's still a hidden crime. We still don't see the number of identified instances of modern slavery that we think are happening. So it's trying to keep that spotlight on it and keep people looking and asking questions and thinking. Okay, go on to the next one, please. So a few highlights in modern slavery. Like Katie says, we talk a lot more about this in one of our awareness sessions that's specific around it. But a few things to sort of try and keep in your mind. So slavery and trafficking prevention orders, they can place really, really detailed and specific restrictions on somebody who's convicted of a trafficking offence when they're released. So you can literally say, you must never have any contact with anyone under 18. You cannot enter this postcode area. You can't hire a car. It can be really specific if it's based on sorts of characteristics of the exploitation that led to that person's conviction. Slavery and trafficking risk order is only has to be based on the likelihood of someone being an exploiter or a trafficker. So we don't need a conviction. We need a weight of intelligence and information to suggest that this person might be involved in trafficking, and that can be really, really helpful, because, as I say, we don't need the conviction. We need to get a court. A court needs to be reasonably convinced that somebody is likely to be committing trafficking offences, and that again can be really useful. So we've it's been used in a few cases to stop people travelling to a particular location, stop people having online communication with children, meaning somebody's got to share the contents of their hard drive with police every 3 months or something. It can be that sort of restriction. It can be quite specific. And if somebody breaches their slavery and trafficking risk order, that's automatically a breach of modern slavery legislation, and then they can go on and be charged with modern slavery offences. So it can be a really powerful tool. There's a perception that it's quite difficult to do, and sometimes it stalls within the court's process. But from our perspective, the more these things are used, the more people know about them, and the easier they become to use. So just have a think about it. And yeah, if you're wanting to go down that route, talk to your local police or talk to us, and we can point you in the right direction. Section 45 of the Modern Slavery Act. If any child commits an offence as a result of being a victim of modern slavery, that provides an automatic defence for the majority of criminal offences. There's a few that aren't covered, but things like petty theft, supply of drugs, minor like carrying a knife, for example, are all covered by that legislation. So if somebody is supplying drugs, and we think that's as a result of them being a victim of county lines, that defence absolutely applies, and that should be considered before court, in court, and for sentencing. I think there's a question there. Sorry, I saw a hand go up.
Yeah, I just wondered what's not covered. What kind of offences? I just attended some training yesterday, and they were talking about the fact that they feel that everything should be covered if that child is a victim of exploitation. And I was wondering yesterday, and you've said it again today, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so there's a schedule in the Modern Slavery Act, and it's generally serious violent offences that aren't covered.
Okay.
We would probably argue that if it's as a result of trafficking, you should still consider it. What we often advocate is we might say, we often write letters to courts, for example, and we might say, this offence isn't covered by Section 45. However, this child is still a victim of trafficking, and it's unlikely this would have happened had they not been a victim of trafficking. So sometimes it can kick in with things like sentencing. So say a child was carrying a firearm because they were a victim of trafficking. The sentencing might say, okay, well, we'd normally give you a custodial sentence, but we know you were made to do this, so we'll give you a youth order, or we'll give you a suspended sentence. So it usually gets considered a bit further down the line. So
okay, so it can be used as mitigation in terms of
absolutely,
sentencing.
Yeah,
okay,
definitely.
Thank you.
No worries. It's a bit of there's a lot more other bits to it, and I can't go through it in huge detail, but just bear in mind that it should be considered where any child is a victim of trafficking, even if that's later down the line. Special measures, so anybody who is a victim of trafficking and has to testify in court is entitled to special measures along the same lines as somebody who's a victim of sexual violence. So they can testify remotely, they can testify behind a screen, the court can require them not to have their perpetrator present while they give testimony. Lots of stuff you can do around that. And they can also be entitled to an intermediary if they're not understanding court proceedings. So a lot of young people we work with have vulnerabilities around things like autism, other neurodivergent conditions, and it affects their understanding of the court process. So they can have a court-appointed intermediary. And Section 46 is another argument, in addition to their special educational need, why they need an intermediary. So it can be really useful. Section 52, that's a duty to notify. So anybody from a first responder organisation, so that's any local authority employee, any police employee, certain charities, including us, if they come across somebody they think is a victim of trafficking, not only should they notify the Home Office, they have to. It's a legal requirement. And the last one, Section 48, that's us. That's the role of independent child trafficking guardian, which basically says that any child in an area we cover has the right to support by a child trafficking guardian, and that the advice we give has to be given due regard and weight, so it has to be considered in the work with that child. So that's like a whistle-stop tour of the Modern Slavery Act. So we'll move on from that. So the NRM then. Just as a show of hands, has anybody done an NRM referral in this group? Just pop your hand up if you have, so I've got a sense of what the level of understanding is. So it's looking like a no. Okay. Has anybody heard of the NRM? Anybody come across it and know roughly what it is? No. Okay. I've got one hand there. Sorry, Russell. Sorry to put you on the spot. What's your understanding of what the NRM is? Just very briefly. No wrong answers. I'm just sort of checking out level of understanding.
That's fine. I'm just trying to take myself off mute and everything. So national referral mechanism.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
For referring people who are at risk of being trafficked.
Yeah.
Was the way I understand it.
Yeah.
So I think there's some kind of database where they can check and register these people on there. So a way of it, sort of information sharing.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. Absolutely. There's a few other bits to it, but that's the primary purpose. Yeah, to recognise and understand.
Yeah, so I go to a lot of strategy meetings and things. So it's often considered in there whether meetings where like Mason meetings where people are discussed a risk of exploitation, and it's often discussed in there about. I've never made one, but about whether a referral needs to be made for NRM or whether it's being done, and yeah.
Oh, that's good. I'm really pleased to hear it's been discussed in there, because that's absolutely the right environment to discuss it. And yeah, you're pretty much spot on. I'll give a bit more detail, but that's what it is, and that's what the purpose of it is. Yeah, so like Russell says, it's to identify and map victims of trafficking, and that informs the response to that, whether that be the national response or the local response. If a person is referred into national referral mechanism, that should automatically trigger a police modern slavery investigation. So even if there isn't very much information, and even if the police literally have to say, we think there's modern slavery, we don't have any more evidence at this point, there's a documented crime of modern slavery on police systems, which is the important bit, because that can be reopened later if more evidence comes to light. And it helps police understand the scale of modern slavery in the areas that they support as well. Feeds into UK's official statistics and data recording. So one of the reasons we're funded in some of the areas we are funded in might be due to the number of NRM referrals or the lack of NRM referrals. That could be a consideration for why our service works in some areas. It can be a gateway to support. So any child who's identified as a victim of modern slavery automatically qualifies for local authority support. Any adult can get support from police, people like the Salvation Army. We have to do it. Section 52, we must notify. And importantly, consent. Because a child will often not understand they've been exploited and doesn't consent to their exploitation. A child doesn't need to consent to be referred into the NRM. So the children who've been groomed and manipulated and don't understand what's happening, we can still refer them in as potential victims of modern slavery to get that kind of reassurance and protection that that's there. We'd always advise that when you can, you explain that to the child in a way that the child understands. But at the outset, we don't necessarily have, they don't have to know that they've been referred into the NRM, and that can be really helpful sometimes where a child's rescued from a situation of exploitation. Okay, I'll go through the process for you now. So I know you've got a devolved NRM panel in York and North Yorkshire. So your decisions are made at a local level, and they're made by people with a knowledge of the area, and they might be made slightly more quickly than would be made otherwise. So I'll talk you through the generic process, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail about what happens in your part of the world. So first stage, NRM referral was made. That's done online. You put your email address into the NRM website. It sends you a secure link, and that gives you a unique NRM referral form that you can complete for the young person you're concerned about. Once that's done, that will go off and be considered by either the Home Office or your devolved panel, and they'll make a reasonable grounds decision. So would a reasonable professional, based on the evidence they're seeing, think that this person is a victim of trafficking? There'll then be further information gathered, and that's a minimum period of 30 days. And they'll make a second decision, which is a balance of probabilities decision. So it's more likely than not that this person is a victim of trafficking. Negative decisions at any point can be appealed. And if you get a negative decision and you later get more information or the picture changes, you can do another referral. There's no limit to how many times you can do that if the situation has changed. So it's not uncommon at all to do an initial NRM referral, and they'll come back and say, no, we don't think there's enough evidence now. Something else happens, you do another one, it's okay, yes, it now meets that threshold. With the devolved panel, the timescales vary a little bit. So my understanding is that you have to have your initial panel discussion within 45 days, and then they will have made a final decision within 90 days. Devolved panels as well, they can skip to the second stage of the process. So if they've got the referral and they straight away think, okay, yeah, we're pretty sure that the trafficking's occurred here, there's a lot of information, they can go straight to the conclusive grounds decision. And at that point, that's the point the NRM process concludes, and that's the point where you can say, yeah, this person on the balance of probabilities is a victim of trafficking. And that helps with things like the Section 45 defence I talked about earlier. A court will usually say, okay, we will consider modern slavery, but we want them to have gone through the whole NRM process first. And what the devolved panels are doing is they're speeding up that process, and they're helping with the local context as well. So we're probably seeing quicker decisions overall because it's taking pressure off of the Home Office main decision-making panel, but we're also seeing more responsive decision-making at a local level. Does that make sense? Because I'm conscious that's quite a lot of detail about the process, but I suppose the key thing is, that's yes, excellent. So at least one of you's got it. That's brilliant. So the key thing is that you do your referral online. You'll get 2 decisions. You can make a referral as many times as you want to if there's new information, and at the end of the process, that child will be recognised as a victim of modern slavery or not as a victim of modern slavery. And it can inform things like asylum decisions. It can be helpful with accessing support. So sometimes we've been able to say, this child has a positive, conclusive NRM. They're deeply traumatized by their trafficking experience. They need urgent mental health support, or the trafficking is absolutely going to continue. So it can sometimes be a way of more urgently accessing support that you might otherwise need. So, for example, accommodation as well. We've helped children be relocated because the trafficking makes them unsafe. Yes, so Catherine says there's a local guide all about the NRM and how to submit it in North Yorkshire. So yeah, please refer to that if you do need to do a referral. And like Katie says, we do an online session where we go in a bit more detail about what the NRM looks like, how to do a referral, that kind of thing. It's quite a logical process. The form takes you through it step by step. So what I would say though is if you're doing an NRM referral, There's a template on the website that tells you what questions are going to be asked, so it will be sensible to go through that first. Have your information pre-prepared, then you can copy and paste it into the NRM when you need to, rather than having to panic and worry it's going to time out on you or anything like that. But our support line can also help with the NRM, so if you're doing a referral, they can give you advice around that as well. Okay, can we go on to the next one, please? So I'm really going to need you to chip in up to give me some thoughts on this one, because we've got two examples of young people we've supported. They're based on real young people. We changed some of the details to anonymize them effectively. We changed some of the locations for the same reason. But what I want you to do is have a think about, when we go through these examples, whether you think it would warrant an NRM referral, what sorts of safeguarding actions you might be taking, and other professionals you might want to get involved. So we'll read through it together. And also actually what the exploitation type is. That would be a good thing for you to pick up as well. So T is a 15-year-old boy. He arrived in the UK 2 years ago from northern Syria. We don't know very much about his journey to the UK, but he has started to talk about working abroad before he came to the UK. He was approached last month by an adult male in a Kurdish restaurant on a busy main road near to his home, and the man paid for his meal, offered him work, and said he would be paid a daily rate of £5. T presented an A&E last week with an injured hand and disclosed he'd been working in a car wash and his hand had been shut in the door accidentally by another young person working there. He also shared that a shop on the same street that he lives on and where the restaurant is has given him free credit for his mobile phone, and that he sometimes gets free food in the restaurant where he meets the adult as well. So, based on that information there, any thoughts on whether you'd submit an NRM referral? Would anybody submit one on the basis of what's there? Oh, we've got some excited typing. Go on. And also, as I say, have a think about who else you would want to speak to once you have this information, and what sort of safeguarding processes you might follow other than an NRM referral. And feel free to shout out. We're quite a small group, so feel free to shout up or stick your hand up, whatever works for you. So go on then, Danielle, you've got something you wanted to comment on this?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, brilliant.
All right. Sorry, my computer won't come on. Yeah, I think I definitely would, and I think that I'd obviously report intelligence to the police about the takeaway, because you never know, they might be already in, and it already might be a place of interest to the police if it's already been doing it with other young people.
Yeah, definitely.
Would you also report it to school, do you think, if school were unaware of this, or has school's already told you this? Sorry.
Yeah, and I suppose you want to find out whether he's actually registered at school. He might not be. Yeah. But yeah, all absolutely spot on. Yeah, check with the police, because there might be a whole network around this restaurant potentially. We don't know, do we? And they might know who this adult male is who's offered him the food. There could be a lot of stuff there.
Would it be enough to put a referral into social care, or would it have to go to someone like early help before it would be a social care issue? Just with them saying that he's working for £5, he's obviously hurt his hand, and is he getting any extra care when he goes home to look after his hand and things like that? I'd be asking all those sorts of questions, if that's right or wrong. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Catherine's got an answer on that one. I mean, it would depend on what was already known about him, I think, because if he was already going to school, or he might already be open to social care, we don't know. But I'll let Catherine answer, because she might have a locally specific answer.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, in this instance, you would refer in. So with any safeguarding concern, you would just go through to our multi-agency screening team. So if he was already open, this additional information would obviously go to the allocated worker, whether that was early help or social care. But it's always best to just pop it in. I'm really pleased that you mentioned about intelligence sharing as well, because that's such a massive factor for disruption nationally. But I know we're doing a big push for it in North Yorkshire. So I'm just about to put another guide in the chat that you can access as well.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I mean, information sharing with all of this stuff is absolutely key, because there's always a picture. There's always a picture around a child. There's always bits and pieces that different people know, and you can put it together, and then something can be done about it. Yeah, in the comments, yes, I would refer this into the NRM. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's enough there to do the initial NRM referral, and you'll gather more information following the initial referral. It does look like it's forced labour, absolutely. Who attended the emergency department with him? Yeah, absolutely. Did somebody drop him off? Did somebody sit with him? If he was there on his own, that in itself is a bit weird, isn't it? So what led to that? Yeah, does he go to school? Does school have any information? Yeah, absolutely. All those sorts of questions. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more we need to know there, but definitely enough to be concerned and to have a reasonable suspicion that there's trafficking going on. And certainly with the working abroad as well, that's part of the picture we need to think about. So yeah, loads of stuff in there and loads of good thoughts. Anyone else? Anything else they wanted to add? Is that your previous hand, Daniel, or is that a new one?
My previous one. Sorry.
No worries. That's okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got another one we can have a look at. Same questions really. What more do we want to know? Would we do an NRM? What safeguarding actions would we take? So N's 14 years old, picked up from her local authority residential home in Coventry, taken to address in Birmingham. N shared that an adult male paid for the taxi. She knew some friends of her own age who were at the address in Birmingham and disclosed that she was supplied with cocaine and alcohol. She woke up alone the following day in an unfamiliar environment, partially dressed, and had bruising on her arms and shoulders. She presented at a police station and referred to a sexual abuse, I can't remember what SARC stands for, that's really bad, but a specialist sexual abuse team. Forensic testing confirmed that she had been raped. So yeah, what would we be looking to find out, and what would we be looking to do as a result of this information? Oh, we've got some typing again in the text. Yeah, as I say, based on real examples, we've just changed some of the details to anonymise them. Anyone have anything they want to say? Put their hand up and say, or are we just okay sharing in chat? I was good with us. Just want to get a sense that you're thinking about what this means for your practice and for your safeguarding processes and NRM referrals. What we should actually do is we should probably tailor this to the areas that we're working in. Yeah, so yeah, Danielle, absolutely what you said before. Yeah, check with the police. Well, police are identifying the crime in this case, but yeah, get a multi-agency meeting, get that information, make sure the intelligence is shared. Be good to know which taxi company it was, because for all we know, the adult male might have an account with them, or they might have information on what number he called from. We could do something through that. There are other young people there as well, so we're concerned about them too. Who are her friends? How are they there? Who invited them? How did they get there? Do we need to be looking at safeguarding or NRM referrals for all of them as well? Yeah, lots of variables there as well. Daniel, you've got your hand up. Anything to add?
Yeah, sorry, just asking another question.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Could you, I know this is obvious, is this like based in your area? Because I was just thinking if it's like here, if you put the information in, can they correspond with different, you know, counties of police and things? Because up here, I think, like we're in North Yorkshire, but West Yorkshire is literally like five minutes down the road from North Yorkshire. And I just wondered, sometimes is that like a barrier to helping the child or not?
It can be, to be brutally honest. It depends on how good the communication is between the forces, but yeah, absolutely, it should be. Yeah, and one of the things that often happens is that the police will put a modern slavery marker on the police national database, so any police force looking on that will see, hang on, modern slavery is a concern, we need to look into that. So, but we'd absolutely hope that the information would be shared. I think most police forces, they work in they have like a regional hub that deals with modern slavery and trafficking, so we'd hope that police will be going through that. And if that isn't happening, it's worth you as professionals asking that question, has it been shared across the forces?
Yeah,
as Michelle says in the chat, the police would almost certainly do most of this as part of the investigation, but it doesn't hurt to ask those questions just in case. Sometimes things get missed, and you'd hope that possibly as part of a strategy meeting, some of these questions would be asked, and people with knowledge might share them. Often people like social workers, people in the community have got better community knowledge than police, because they're out and about in those locations sometimes. So it's always worth having that conversation.
Thank you.
No worries. Oh, Catherine, is there anything you wanted to add in with this one?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify about the cross-border work. Obviously, it's a really big issue for us in North Yorkshire, because we're surrounded by lots of counties. We do have procedures in place for cross-border intelligence sharing. You've already mentioned about the NRM markers. The other thing to just be aware of is the young people who are at risk of trafficking or under NRM will often have an exploitation risk status as well. And you can link in, we have a team of specialist social workers who cover and have had more of an in-depth knowledge around exploitation and trafficking in NRM, and they're the ones that have those cross-border links as well. So they kind of link in with their specialist social worker team. So if you do have a case and you do have concerns around those cross-border links, try and link in with the specialist social worker. If you're not sure, you can always just email me and I'll point you in the right direction. I'll make sure my email's in the chat.
Oh, that's amazing. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks.
It's really variable in different parts of the country, so that sounds like a really good setup. That's really encouraging to hear. Okay, have I got anything else to say on this one? I don't think you're picking it up. You're getting a sense of as we'd expect, of what you would want to do in these situations. Can we move on to the next one? It might be back to you, Katie. I can't remember the order of the slides, but
yeah, it's back to me for the section around language now. I think.
Brilliant, thank you.
So yeah, great. Just to double check, I suppose, is we're going to move on to we're kind of coming towards the end, but we're going to briefly think about language we use when we're talking to young people and working with young people. So just if there's anything still in your brains about NRM or modern slavery or types of trafficking, if you want to ask a question around that now while it's fresh in your brain, then that's absolutely fine, or put it in the chat. And the other thing I suppose to say at this juncture is we have some awareness raising sessions specifically around the Modern Slavery Act and specifically around the National Referral Mechanism. So if you're interested, they're only an hour, so if you're interested in kind of finding out a bit more of them, like for example, when we were talking about the defence for young people in the Modern Slavery Act, we really go into that in a lot more detail, what offences are covered, what aren't, and actually even if an offence isn't covered, how, as Jonathan said, how it can still be really important to make sure, even though you can't technically use that Section 45 defence, how it's really important to make sure that it's mentioned. And for example, the fact that a national referral mechanism process is going through for that young person is really important to mention as part of that kind of criminal justice process. So those two sessions are really kind of a bit more in depth, and they're on our website. We've got dates throughout April, May and June, and then we also do a safety planning and disruption session. So with these two examples that we've just heard about, where all those things where you might be thinking about, well, if I'm working with a young person, and there's still some ongoing risks I'm concerned about, even though we've done our best to kind of manage those risks, how might I be working with the professionals and the young person to think about kind of putting a safety plan in place for that young person that's really tangible, really meaningful, and also what might I be thinking and doing in terms of my work with that young person, but also them themselves, their understanding, and other professionals around disrupting any harm. This is a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we've got those kind of more in-depth sessions that the dates are on our website. Okay, I'm going to move on. I can't see the chat unless I come off this screen, which I'm trying not to do. So we're just going to talk about language a bit, but I might ask you to kind of, shout out or put something in the chat. We always include this section in absolutely everything that we do at the National Counter-Trafficking Centre. There's loads of experience in this room, and it's not about kind of teaching anybody to suck eggs. It's about just reminding ourselves really, and kind of emboldening ourselves, I suppose, to possibly challenge the language that we might hear or that we might read from other professionals or other services or other organisations about young people. When we write about young people in our case notes, in our reports, or when we're talking about young people in meetings or with young people, of course, and to young people and children, the language that we use, of course, really, really matters. And as I say, hopefully none of this is news to you, but we've had really good feedback about these sections in our training, and I think it never hurts, does it, as a professional, to just double check yourself and really think about that. And of course, there's lots and lots of different kind of writing and whole training courses about this, but it's just helpful to kind of flag it really, especially when we're talking about things like the national referral mechanism. So for example, when we're doing those referrals, when we're gathering that evidence, it's really important that we think about how we write about the child and perhaps their behaviour or what they're experiencing. So obviously we know that everything, language matters, and children, we know that children hear what we say to them, what we say about them, and we know that they read what is said about them. And we also know, I'm sure we've all had that experience as professionals, where you're reading something about a child and it's kind of almost gospel truth, but actually you then discover that's not something that actually happened. It was a view of a professional, or it was something that was not that a professional wasn't sure about, but they thought had probably happened. So it's just really important to make sure that we kind of consider that. And also shifting the narrative. So a key element of obviously seeing children, young people as victims of modern slavery and victims of trafficking is shifting that narrative between children making choices and being responsible for their actions, their behaviour, their choices, versus children actually being exploited. Children's behaviour being as a result of them being exploited, and therefore they need support and they need safeguarding action from professionals to kind of protect them. So just a few examples, if we do a bit of if you can humour me and do a bit of a kind of an exercise. So for example, a classic one that people, professionals or adults generally, hopefully a lot less these days, but certainly I'm sure we've perhaps all heard, certainly my experience when I was working in youth justice kind of 15 odd years ago, would have been written about young people, might have even been spoken about young people. So for example, somebody who's perhaps been sexually exploited, we might hear, or professionals might talk about somebody being promiscuous, or somebody having older boyfriends, so yeah, it's just kind of I don't know if anybody's kind of been familiar with hearing that kind of language, and whether anybody's got any ideas of like what we might write or say instead of that. So if you kind of, for example, you're reading a report and it talks about a young person whose behaviour is promiscuous, or who who's getting in a car, who is kind of going missing, running away, getting in a car with older men. Have you got any ideas? Can you put in the chat or kind of raise your hand about how we might shift that language a bit, what you might say or words you might use, phrases to shift that language to be acknowledging of that young person not necessarily making those choices, but that behaviour kind of happening to them. I can't see the chat, so I don't know if anybody's feverishly writing.
We've got some typing going on, Katie. Yeah. Catherine says being exploited by or being abused by.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. That's brilliant. So another example might be, for example, this young person, they've been seen begging, or they're always begging. Can anybody think of a way in which you might shift that? Really simple, but really powerful.
Russell says maybe being financially abused. Absolutely,
yeah. And the key thing there is being made. So actually, even shifting our language from saying like, "Oh, this person goes begging," to this person is being made to beg. There's a huge difference there, isn't there, in that language? So in terms of behaviour, so a young person getting involved in crime, hanging around with a bad crowd, getting involved in crime, committing offences. what might be an alternative shift there.
Oh, Danielle's got her hand up.
Go on, Danielle.
Right, sorry, do you mean like the people are putting in the chat like at risk, or do you mean changing the actual wording that you're putting in the report as if to say, like, you know, when she's going into cars, would you say that there's a male waiting for her at the end, you know, at the end of the drive, and she appears to be getting into the car with them? Do you mean the type of language?
Absolutely.
Or pointing out where it is?
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely, Danielle.
Question.
That detail, absolutely, rather than she's getting into cars with older men.
Yeah.
You know, that implies that's her choice, doesn't it? That implies that that's kind of free choice. It's exactly that detail of, you know, cars continue to appear at the residential home, and you know she's then appears to be getting into them. It's that, like, kind of somebody's bringing that to her, and there's a pressure on her to respond to that, rather than, you know, she's willy-nilly off getting in cars. It's that shift in language, exactly that. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's very similar to the concept of victim blaming language, isn't it, with domestic abuse, for example, that perhaps has been, you know, we've kind of all learned a bit more about in the last few years, and professionals generally tend to be a bit better about, you know, putting the blame on the perpetrator, you know, constantly talking about, so that classic of, you know, rather than she goes begging, she's being made to beg. Another in terms of criminal exploitation or committing offences, you know, rather than he's getting involved in crime and he's committing offences, he is being criminally exploited. You know, he's being arrested for offences, he's being criminally exploited. It's just a really clearer kind of statement, isn't it, about where we think that the blame lies, really shifting that language from children making choices and being responsible for that, to actually where we think that they're being exploited, that being the perpetrator's behaviour that's resulting in the behaviour of the child. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We're all probably quite familiar with things like, you know, hopefully shifting kind of things like, you know, a child is being aggressive, to rather than using that language to talk about things like, you know, can display aggressive behaviour as a response to trauma, or can become upset because of the trauma that they've experienced. And also the classic refusing to engage, you know, so rather than talking about young people refusing to engage, talking about things like, we have not yet been able to engage this young person, or we've not yet been able to find a way to encourage that young person to feel that they can engage. It can seem a bit more wordy sometimes, but we always include this little discussion because it can be so powerful if you're putting an RM referral in, for example, to be really clear that you're talking about, you know, where you think a young person's being exploited, that you're talking about that behaviour of perpetrators and the exploiters resulting in whatever it is that is the presenting then behaviour of the child. Okay, I've gone on about that slide, sorry.
Well, I think Catherine's got something to add, or a question, I think.
Yeah, sorry, me again. I've popped another link in the chat. We do have a really nice pack in North Yorkshire, all around kind of the use of language, particularly around victims of exploitation. So if you're ever kind of struggling, it gives you some really clear examples of things that you can say instead of, like you say, just shifting away from that victim blaming language. And we've got a couple of kind of reflective questions on there as well. So again, you can take that back to your teams. You can use it in team development sessions or supervision to just get you really kind of reflecting on the language that you use.
Perfect, thank you, Catherine, that's great. And in our very last slide has got some links in it, some helpful links, and I think it's Children's Society, I think that there's a link to a section around language as well. Okay, we're right at the end of our time. We don't want to keep you, and but we did want to leave time for a few questions. So, but you've been great and you've asked questions throughout. So if there is anything that you would like to ask us, you can use if you've got any particular questions around referrals, you can use the email there. That will come out on the slide. You'll all get a copy of these slides, and our website, would really encourage you to access our website in terms of general information, also being able to refer through to us, but also our training. I'm just going to leave this QR code up there, and if people can take a picture of that and then and send us some feedback, that'd be really appreciated. Or if you can, I don't know if you're doing a separate feedback session, Catherine, you might be doing your own form or your own process.
Yeah, I think once I've got the attendees marked off with NYES, which is where partners have booked through from, you will probably get a feedback form through there as well. But I mean, either or, we'll collate anything and share it with you.
Great. And then just our very last slide there is lots and lots of useful links. So there's the NRM guidance from the Home Office, there's our ICTG guidance, there's the language guide from the Children's Society, like I said, there's our website, and there's also some information about from the Contextual Safeguarding Programme, which is a brilliant programme in terms of supporting young people around some of these risks. I'm just going to stop sharing, but if anybody's got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just chat up.
While we're waiting for the questions to come through, if anyone's got any, I just want to say an enormous thank you to Katie and Jonathan. That was such an informative session. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully partners did too. Again, if you've got any quick bits of feedback or if you've enjoyed it, pop it in the chat for us. It's always nice to hear at the end of a delivery. I'm conscious as well that some partners like to ask questions after the recording has stopped. So I'm going to stop the recording and then people can ask anything after that. But thank you.
Thanks for that, Catherine.